Welcome to Machine Learning Lesson 2.1. In this lesson, we're going to start off our exploration of machine learning by looking into the Pandas Library. Now, Pandas Library is meant for data science, not just for machine learning. We're also going to talk about the type of information that we can look at with Pandas and eventually with machine learning. In this, we're going to learn how to gather information and then how to explore it. So let's get to it. So if you go online and look up Pandas, I'll start here. You'll see that right in the headlines it says it's a data analysis tool and manipulation. So again, you can use it for a lot of other things other than just machine learning. Something akin to maybe like an Excel. But again, it's a lot more than Excel. I would honestly say there's certain things, if it's simple, might be easier to do in Excel. But again, that's the idea behind Pandas, is that it's a tool to look at data. Just as a side note, if you go to the Getting Started and you're curious to see how are they suggesting you get started? Well, they're going to talk about a different package, something called Anaconda, that you can use to install a Juniper notebook on your local computer, so we can locally use Pandas and machine learning. Again, you're more than welcome to try this. It is quite a few steps. It does take a while. But you know what? If this is what you want to explore, you can. Luckily enough for us, and the approach we're going to use throughout the rest of this video series, is that Google has the online application called Colab, which gives us this platform that we can use Pandas and do a bunch of machine learning without having to install anything. The other benefit of Colab is that your files will be available to you wherever you can log into Google. So let's go to Colab. So if you recall, Colab is colab.research.google.com, or if you forget, you can simply start typing Colab up here, hit enter, and then the first link that comes up, that's your Colab. So let's do a new notebook. And don't forget, because this is a Google application, when you create it, it's going to get installed into your Google Drive. Maybe I'll show you that towards the end, exactly where on your Google Drive you're going to see these Jupyter notebooks. So let's call this Machine Learning Lesson 2.1. Okay. So in here, we could do a couple of things. As we mentioned, this is an interactive Python platform, akin to the shell that you would in an IDE. So as you run code, as you type code, you can run code immediately. On the left side, you're going to see a couple of tabs. This last one has to do with files. So we can load files up. Again, we're going to be doing data science. We're going to be dealing with a lot of data, so we can load data up. So I'm going to grab a data set. And we can simply drag it. Oops, just want to drag one. All right, so one of the things you're going to notice immediately when you drag it, it says a reminder, uploaded files will get deleted when this runtime is recycled. What that means is that we can load up data this way, but the next time we open up this notebook, the data is not going to be there. Your program is going to be there, but not the data. So I'm going to choose a different way of showing you how to get to the data, which is by getting it through the internet. But before we do that, we have to actually upload or load the library. So we're going to say import pandas as PD. Now again, if you're not familiar with this part of Python, again, import pandas. That'll import the library. The as PD allows us to refer to the library by the two letters PD instead of having to write pandas all the time. So this isn't a requirement, but because we're going to be using the library so much, it's a lot easier just to write PD instead of pandas. So let's run this. And again, we're not going to get any output, but at the very least, we see that there's no errors, which means the library is successfully loaded. All right, so let's create a variable called df. which stands for data frame. You'll learn more about that in the next video. And Pandas has a nice function called read CSV. You'll also notice that it has a read Excel, read JSON, read Pickle, read SQL, a bunch of things we can use. So we're going to go with the read CSV. And what we're going to do is we're going to provide it a link. And the link that we're going to use is on Replit, I have uploaded a bunch of resources. But honestly, you can get data from anywhere. If you're familiar with NYC Open Data, you know that it provides data in a JSON format. So you could pull down the data that way. But for all the videos, for all the exercises in this video series, you're going to be linking to one of these resources that I have provided through Replit. So I'm going to say copy the base link, and then we can simply write one of these. So we're going to use the mpg cleaned.csv. So let's go back here. And we'll do mpg cleaned.csv. And as usual, let's go ahead and run it. We notice no errors. That's a good thing. Okay. So now you might be curious, well, what is this data that's in there? So the nice thing, we can simply do print df. And there you go. So this is the data. Doesn't look very pretty. Now, there's one of the cool things we can use with the Jupyter Notebook is that instead of using printdf, if we simply do df, the name of the variable, as the very last statement in the code block, it displays the information in a nice format. Again, remember, a Jupyter Notebook encourages you to write things in code blocks. So that way, the last thing that could be in the code block could simply be a display statement. So this is a lot nicer to look at. So you can see the data has, miles per gallon, cylinders, displacements, horsepower, weight, acceleration, model year, origin, and then car name. What you'll notice that when we print df, it gives us a little snapshot. It gives us the first 5 entries in the data, and it gives us the last 5 entries in the data. It also tells us how many rows and columns we have. So that's really nice. Again, the whole idea when you first start off with Pandas is that you have to deal with the information. And I also want to go back to this slide. Recall that half of the process in machine learning has to do with just gathering the data, preparing the data, analyzing the data. So it's important for us to be able to look at the data and figure out what it's saying to us. Okay, so open up another code block. Again, if you notice, if you simply click down at the bottom, you'll get the little plus sign. If this becomes a challenge, kind of get into the right spot, you can always just click up here. So let's say we don't want to look at the top 5 and the bottom 5. Let's say we just want to look at the top 5. So I can do df, which is our data frame or our data set, and simply click on head. If we do that, we get the first 5. The other thing we can do is that we can provide it a number. So let's say we don't want to look at the first 5. We want to look at the first 3. We can do that. And if you can guess, if I want to look at the last 3 instead of the head of the data, it's the tail of the data. So if I do tail 3, I get the last 3. And similarly, if I leave off the number, I get the last 5. So that's one way that you can start looking at your data, simply by just exploring it. Another good thing to look at is, let's say, df.info. And let's run that. And what you'll see here is that it lists the columns, but it also lists the data types. Again, that's important because if you're going to start doing some kind of manipulation with the data, you're going to want to know whether it's a float, an int, a Boolean. Now, it's interesting to see if you look at the car name, the data type has it down as object. Now, most people from programming will call these strings. That's a data type. Again, in Pandas, they just clump everything together as an object. Again, just something to note. It doesn't mean that it's not a string. It is a string. but it's being stored as an object. All right, so moving on, we can also, let's create another code block. And now let's look at, let's say we just want to look at the columns. We don't want so much information. So I can do df.columns. And there we go, we get the column names. Now you're going to see this thing called index in the front of it. So this isn't your typical array, as you can see here, because of the square brackets. It's a little bit more. Again, this is a pandas object. So you can treat it like an array, but it's a little bit more than that. If you go a step further and type in values, you also get something that kind of looks like an array, but it's not. You see the word array in front. That's because Pandas is built on another library called Numpy. So this is a Numpy array. Again, this is all getting very confusing, but honestly, just treat it like an array. And one way I can prove it to you is MPG is the first item in the arrays, which means if I do bracket 0, I get MPG. Okay? But I just want you to know underneath the hood, there's a lot of other things happening because we're working with the libraries. Now, let's take a look at one more way of looking at our data. And that would be df.shape. It's very simple. If you can recall, we've seen these two numbers before, 392 and 9. If you scroll all the way up, that's the number of rows and columns. So again, this is just a simple way of getting that piece of information, the number of rows and columns. So let's go back to our presentation and let's review what we've done in this video. So we introduced Pandas Library, how it's very powerful library in Python to do data exploration, data manipulation, data analysis, which is going to help us in our machine learning. The type of information we're going to look at, it has to kind of fall in a table, rows and columns. We saw how we can load up the CSV file, but we also saw we could load up other things such as Excel, JSON, SQL tables. And we finished off the video with looking at different ways of finding out information about our data. So through practice, you will learn how to use this and you'll see the value of being able to do data analysis with Pandas. Enjoy.